I've always been the kind of guy who likes to keep things simple. Name's Jake, 38, single, and I run a small landscaping business out of my truck. My pride and joy, though, isn't the perfectly trimmed hedges I sculpt for clients. It's my cabin, tucked away in the woods on a 50-acre plot I inherited from my granddad. It's my escape from the world. No neighbors within shouting distance, just pine trees, a creek that gurgles like it's gossiping about the rocks, and the occasional deer that stares at me like I owe it rent. The air smells like freedom, crisp and untainted by suburban nonsense. Or so I thought. The trouble started when I got a call from my buddy, Tom, who lives in Pineview Estates, a gated community about a mile from my land. Pineview's the kind of place where the lawns are so manicured they look like they've been bullied into submission, and the houses all have that cookie-cutter vibe, like someone copy-pasted a realtor's fever dream. Tom's a good guy, a mechanic who's fixed my truck more times than I can count, but he's got the misfortune of living under the iron fist of the Pineview Homeowners Association. "Jake," he said, his voice crackling through my ancient flip phone, "you gotta watch out. The HOA's sniffing around your property." I laughed. My cabin's not part of their precious community. My land's been in the family since before HOAs were even a glint in some control freak's eye. But Tom wasn't laughing. "It's Karen," he said, like that explained everything. And honestly, it did. Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, was a legend in all the wrong ways. The kind of woman who'd measure your grass with a ruler and send you a fine if it was half an inch too long. Rumor had it she once reported a kid's lemonade stand for unapproved commercial activity. A real pillar of the community, that one. I shrugged it off. My cabin was on private land, outside their jurisdiction. What was she gonna do? Glare at my trees until they apologized? But I should have known better. People like Karen don't just let things go. They're like wasps, annoying, persistent, and convinced they're the center of the universe. 2 days later, I'm at the cabin, sipping coffee on the porch, when I hear the crunch of tires on gravel. Not my gravel, my driveway's half a mile long, and I'd hear a car coming. This was from the dirt road that cuts through the edge of my property, the one the county lets Pineview use for access to their back gate. I set my mug down, the ceramic clinking against the weathered wood, and squinted through the morning mist. A white SUV rolled up, gleaming like it had just been waxed by someone who hated their job. Out steps Karen herself, clipboard in hand, wearing a pantsuit so crisp it could have doubled as a paperweight. She had that classic HOA Karen look, hair teased into a helmet of blonde curls, lips pursed like she'd just bitten into a lemon and decided it was everyone else's fault. Behind her was a guy in a polo shirt, probably mid-20s, with the nervous energy of someone who'd been roped into something stupid. He was holding a camera, the kind you'd use to catch someone committing the heinous crime of parking incorrectly. "Morning," I called, leaning back in my chair, letting my voice carry that extra bit of cheer that I knew would get under her skin. "Lost your way? Suburbia's back that direction." I pointed vaguely toward Pineview. Karen didn't smile. She never smiled, according to Tom. "Mr. Larson," she said, like she was addressing a delinquent at a parent-teacher conference, "we've received complaints about your structure." She gestured at my cabin like it was a pile of trash instead of a hand-built retreat with cedar walls and a stone chimney. I laid myself. "Complaints?" I raised an eyebrow, sipping my coffee slow enough to make her wait. "From who? The squirrels? They're pretty happy with me. I pay my taxes in acorns." Her lips twitched, but not in a fun way. "This area is zoned for residential use, and your shack doesn't meet code. It's an eyesore, and it's lowering property values for the entire community." I snorted. "Lady, my cabin's been here longer than your neighborhood. And last I checked, my land's not part of your little dictatorship. You got no say here." She held up her clipboard like it was the 10 Commandments. "The HOA has authority over any structures visible from our community. We're well within our rights to demand compliance." The guy with the camera started snapping pictures of my cabin, like he was documenting a crime scene. I noticed he avoided eye contact, probably because he knew this was ridiculous. I stood up, brushing sawdust off my jeans. "Visible? You can't even see my place from Pineview unless you're trespassing. Which, by the way, you are. This road's on my property. You got 5 minutes to explain why you're here before I start charging you rent." Karen's eyes narrowed, and I swear I could hear her brain calculating how to spin this into a fine. "We're conducting a survey," she said, her voice dripping with that fake politeness people use when they're trying to sell you something awful. "And we've had reports of unauthorized construction. You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I laughed again, louder this time. "Good luck with that. My granddad's deed is ironclad. You'd have better odds suing the creek for making too much noise." I took a step forward, and camera guy flinched like I was about to throw a punch. Karen didn't budge, but I could tell she wasn't used to people talking back. Most folks in Pineview probably folded the second she waved that clipboard. She scribbled something down, probably my name with troublemaker next to it. "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel. Camera guy scurried after her, and they peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust that settled on my porch like an insult. I watched them go, the SUV's taillights glowing like Karen's self-righteous fury. I should have been annoyed, but honestly, I was kind of amused. Karen thought she could roll up on my land and throw her weight around. Cute. What she didn't know, what nobody in Pineview seemed to know, was that my granddad didn't just leave me this land. He left me something else, leverage. See, my property includes a chunk of the access road Pineview relies on, and I'm the one who signs off on their permits every year. Without my signature, their precious gated community is cut off from the county road. Karen had no idea who she was messing with, but she was about to find out. I grabbed my phone and texted Tom. "Karen just paid me a visit. Time to have some fun." His reply came back in seconds. "Oh man, grab popcorn." I grinned, poured myself another coffee, and started planning. If Karen wanted a war, I'd give her one my way. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of pine and the distant hum of a lawnmower from Pineview. Probably some poor soul trying to avoid Karen's wrath. I stretched, my joints popping like the floorboards of my cabin, and checked my mailbox down by the county road. Sure enough, there it was, a crisp envelope with the Pineview HOA logo, looking like it had been ironed before delivery. I tore it open, half expecting a glitter bomb of bureaucracy, and found a letter that could have been written by a robot with a grudge. "Dear Mr. Larson," it began, in that font that screams, "We spent too much on letterhead." The gist? My cabin was an unpermitted structure that violated community aesthetic standards. They demanded I submit to an inspection or face fines, legal action, and, my favorite part, remedial measures. I could practically hear Karen's smug voice dictating it, her pen stabbing the paper with every word. I tossed the letter on my kitchen table, next to a half-eaten apple and a stack of unpaid bills, and laughed. Remedial measures? What were they going to do? Repaint my cabin in HOA-approved beige. I called Tom to get the scoop. "She's been ranting at the HOA meeting," he said, his voice muffled like he was hiding in his garage. "Says your place is a blight on the community, and she's got the board eating out of her hand. They're talking about petitioning the county to condemn your property." I whistled low. "Condemn? That's bold, even for her. She got any actual grounds?" "Nah," Tom said. "She's just banking on you not fighting back. Most people here roll over when she starts waving her rulebook. Plus, she's got that lawyer, some guy named Greg who looks like he'd sell his own kids for a corner office." I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under me. Let her try? She's about to learn I'm not most people. I hung up and dug through my desk for the folder I hadn't touched in years, my granddad's land records. The deed was there, yellowed but clear as day, along with the easement agreement that gave Pineview access to my road. I skimmed it, my finger tracing the clause that made me grin. Any changes to the road status required my approval. Karen thought she was the queen of Pineview, but I held the keys to her kingdom. I decided to poke the bear a little. I drove to the edge of my property, where the dirt road meets Pineview's back gate, and put up a sign, "Private property. No trespassing without permission. Contact Jake Larson." I made it big, with red letters on a white board, impossible to miss. It wasn't subtle, but neither was Karen. I figured it'd get her attention, and maybe make her think twice before sending her minions to snoop again. Sure enough, by noon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, leaning against my truck, the metal warm from the sun. Jake speaking. This is Karen Mitchell, Pineview HOA. Came the voice, sharp enough to cut glass. Your sign is causing a disturbance. Residents are concerned about access to their homes. I smirked. Funny, I'm concerned about people trespassing on my land. That road's mine, Karen. You want access? Be nice. There was a pause, long enough that I could hear her breathing, probably counting to 10 to keep from exploding. The HOA has a legal right to that road, she said, each word clipped like she was spitting out nails. Remove the sign, or we'll escalate this. Escalate away, I said, keeping my tone light. But you might want to check the county records first. Could save you some embarrassment. I hung up before she could reply, feeling a spark of satisfaction. Round one to me. That evening, I was splitting firewood behind the cabin when Tom showed up, his truck rattling like it was held together by duct tape. He hopped out, a grin splitting his face. You stirred the hornet's nest, man. Karen's been emailing the whole neighborhood, saying you're holding the community hostage. I swung the axe, the blade biting into the log with a satisfying thud. Hostage? Nah. I'm just reminding her who owns what. She sent anything else? Tom pulled out his phone and showed me an email blast from the HOA. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive nonsense, calling my sign an act of aggression and urging residents to report any suspicious activity on my property. It ended with a call to protect our community's values. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly sprained something. What's next, a pitchfork mob? Tom laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. She's got people spooked. Some of the older folks think you're going to block the road and trap them in Pineview. I wiped sweat off my brow, the air thick with the scent of split pine. Let him worry. Maybe it'll teach him to vote her out next election. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't just posturing. She had the kind of stubbornness that could turn a molehill into a mountain, and I wasn't about to let her bulldoze me. The next day, I got a visit from the county sheriff's deputy. He pulled up in a cruiser, lights off, looking about as thrilled as a guy who'd just been told to clean a porta-potty. Mr. Larson, he said, stepping out, his boots crunching on the gravel. Got a call about a disturbance. Something about a sign. I offered him a cold soda from my cooler, which he took with a nod. Let me guess. Karen Mitchell? He sighed, like her name was a curse word. Yeah. She says you're blocking a public road. Called 911. Made it sound like you were out here with a barricade and a shotgun. I laughed, loud enough to scare a crow out of a nearby tree. Public road? That's rich. Come on, I'll show you. I walked him to the sign, then handed him a copy of the easement agreement. His eyes skimmed the page, and he let out a low whistle. Well, damn, he said, scratching his neck. She didn't mention this. Looks like you're in the clear, but you might want to watch your back. She's not the type to back down. I nodded, shaking his hand. Appreciate you coming out. Next time, tell her to save the county some gas money. He chuckled and drove off, leaving me staring at the sign, the red letters glowing in the afternoon sun. Karen had escalated, all right. Calling 911 over a sign? That was next-level petty, even for her. But I wasn't worried, not yet. I had the law on my side, and a few tricks up my sleeve. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd show her I could play dirtier. I grabbed my laptop and started digging into Pineview's permits, a plan forming in my head. Karen thought she was untouchable, but she was about to learn that power only works until someone pulls the plug. The next few days felt like the calm before a storm, the kind where the air gets heavy and the birds go quiet. I kept busy with my landscaping gigs, trimming hedges and hauling mulch, but my mind was on Karen and her little HOA empire. I knew she wasn't done. People like her don't retreat, they reload. Sure enough, by Wednesday, I got another letter, this one thicker than the last, like it was trying to compensate for something. It was a formal notice from Pineview's lawyer, Greg, demanding I remove my obstructive signage and submit my cabin for an HOA inspection within 48 hours. Failure to comply, it warned, would result in legal action and potential seizure of assets. I read it twice, not because I was worried, but because the sheer audacity made me laugh. Seizure of assets? What? Were they going to repossess my axe and my coffee maker? I tossed the letter onto my kitchen table, where it joined its predecessor next to a pile of pine cones I'd been meaning to clear out. The cabin smelled of cedar and the faint tang of motor oil from my chainsaw, which I'd been cleaning earlier. I sat down with my laptop, the screen casting a pale glow across the room, and pulled up the county's property records. My granddad's deed was airtight, and the easement agreement was clear. Pineview's access to the road depended on my goodwill. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Timing is everything, and I wanted Karen to dig herself a deeper hole before I yanked the rug out. I decided to do some recon. I drove to Pineview's main entrance, parking just outside their fancy wrought iron gate, the kind that screams, "We're better than you." The guard, a bored-looking guy named Carl who I'd met at Tom's poker nights, waved me through with a grunt. I didn't plan on going far, just enough to see what Karen was up to. The neighborhood was eerily perfect. Identical mailboxes, lawns mowed to within an inch of their lives, and not a single kid's bike out of place. It was like walking into a Stepford Wives reboot, except the villain was a clipboard-wielding Karen instead of a robot. I spotted her near the community center, a squat building with too many windows and a sign boasting, "Pineview, where community thrives." Karen was holding court with a gaggle of residents, her voice carrying over the hum of sprinklers. "We cannot allow one man's recklessness to jeopardize our property values," she was saying, waving a stack of papers like a preacher with a Bible. The crowd nodded along, though a few looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I caught the eye of an older woman in a sun hat, who gave me a quick, sympathetic glance before looking away. Interesting. Not everyone was drinking Karen's Kool-Aid. I leaned against a lamppost, pretending to check my phone, and listened. Karen was in full dictator mode, talking about escalating measures and protecting our community's integrity. She mentioned my cabin specifically, calling it a hazard and claiming it was attracting undesirable wildlife. I stifled a laugh. The only wildlife my cabin attracted was deer and the occasional raccoon who tried to unionize my trash cans. But Karen was spinning a narrative, and the crowd was eating it up, or at least, most of them were. That's when I noticed camera guy from before, still trailing Karen like a nervous puppy. He was handing out flyers with a grainy photo of my cabin, captioned, "Unpermitted structure threatening Pineview." I snorted. Threatening? The only thing my cabin threatened was Karen's ego. I grabbed a flyer from a trash can and read it. It demanded residents sign a petition to force the county to investigate my property. Clever. She was trying to rally the mob to pressure the county, probably hoping I'd cave under the weight of bureaucracy. I wasn't about to let that slide. I drove back to the cabin, the flyer crumpled in my fist, and called Tom. "You see this petition nonsense?" I asked, pacing the porch. The boards creaked under my boots, and a hawk circled overhead, probably wondering why I was so worked up. "Yeah," Tom said, his voice low like he was dodging Karen's spies. "She's got half the neighborhood signing it. Says you're running some kind of illegal operation out there. A few folks think you're cooking meth or something." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "Meth? My biggest vice is instant coffee." She's desperate. I paused, glancing at the easement agreement on my table. "Time to turn up the heat. You know anybody in Pineview who's sick of her?" Tom hesitated. "Maybe. There's Mrs. Delaney, the one in the sun hat. She's been here forever, hates Karen's guts. Says she's been fleecing the HOA budget for years. Nobody listens to her, though. Karen's got the board wrapped around her finger." "Mrs. Delaney, huh?" I filed that away. An ally could be useful, especially one with dirt on Karen. "Keep your ears open, Tom. I'm going to make her regret that petition." My next move was subtle but pointed. I printed out a stack of my own flyers, simple and to the point. "Pineview HOA is trespassing on private property. Want to know why your access road depends on my land? Ask your president." I included a copy of the easement agreement's key clause, just enough to plant seeds of doubt without giving away my full hand. I dropped them in Pineview's mailboxes at 2 a.m., wearing a hoodie and moving like a teenager pulling a prank. The air was cool, the streetlights buzzing softly, and I couldn't help but grin as I slipped the last flyer into a mailbox shaped like a lighthouse. Let Karen explain that one. By morning, Pineview was buzzing. Tom texted me updates. Karen was furious, holding an emergency HOA meeting to address the misinformation. I could imagine her clutching her clipboard, her face redder than the tomatoes I grew behind the cabin. But she didn't stop there. That afternoon, I was fixing a loose shutter when another sheriff's cruiser pulled up. Same deputy as before, looking even more tired. "Jake," he said, tipping his hat, "got another call. Karen says you're harassing residents with illegal flyers." I handed him a soda and a copy of my flyer. "Harassing? I'm just sharing public records. You want to arrest me for that? Go ahead. I could use a nap in a cell." He chuckled, skimming the flyer. "This is going to cause a mess. You know that, right? She's got the county clerk on speed dial." "Let her call," I said, hammering the shutter back into place. The bang echoed through the trees. "She's the one trespassing, not me. Check the deed if you don't believe me." He nodded, tucking the flyer into his pocket. "I believe you. But Karen's got friends in high places. Watch yourself." He drove off, and I went back to my shutter, the hammer heavy in my hand. Karen was escalating, but so was I. The petition was her way of rallying the troops, but my flyers had cracked her facade. I could feel the tension building, like the moment before a log splits under the axe. That night, I sat on my porch, the air thick with the scent of damp earth after a brief rain. I sipped my coffee, staring at the stars through the pines. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but she'd picked the wrong fight. I had the deed, the road, and a growing list of ideas to make her regret ever stepping foot on my land. Mrs. Delaney was my next stop. She sounded like someone who'd enjoy watching Karen squirm, and I was just getting started. The sun was barely up when I headed to Pineview to track down Mrs. Delaney. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet grass and the faint hum of sprinklers already at work in the neighborhood. I parked my truck just outside the gate, the engine ticking as it cooled, and walked to her house, which Tom had pointed out as the one with the wildflower garden that Karen hated. Sure enough, the front yard was a riot of color: daisies, black-eyed Susans, and some purple blooms I couldn't name, all defying the HOA's obsession with uniformity. It was like the garden was giving Karen the middle finger, and I liked it already. I knocked on the door, the wood painted a cheerful yellow that clashed with Pineview's beige dystopia. Mrs. Delaney answered, a wiry woman in her late 60s with a sun hat so big it could have doubled as a satellite dish. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, sized me up in half a second. "You're the cabin guy," she said, not a question. "Heard you're giving Karen a headache." "Good." I grinned, leaning against the porch railing. "Jake Larson. I hear you're not her biggest fan either." She snorted, stepping outside with a mug of tea that smelled faintly of chamomile. "That woman's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for years. Come in, but wipe your boots. I don't need Karen finding me for dirt tracks." Her porch was cluttered with potted plants and a wind chime that tinkled like it was laughing at the HOA's rules. Inside, her living room was a museum of knickknacks, porcelain cats, framed photos of grandkids, and a bookshelf stuffed with gardening manuals. She sat me down at a table covered with a lace doily and got straight to the point. "Karen's been skimming the HOA budget," she said, her voice low but steady. "New benches, fancy streetlights, that ridiculous fountain in the community center. She's got her cousin's construction company handling every project, and the invoices don't add up. I've been trying to get the board to audit her for years, but she's got them scared or bought." I leaned forward, the chair creaking under me. "You got proof?" She tapped a folder on the table, thick with papers. Receipts, emails, even a few photos of her cousin's crew doing shoddy work. "I showed it to the board last year, but Karen spun it as me being disruptive. Got me banned from meetings for 6 months. Her lips curled into a smirk. "She didn't count on you stirring things up." I flipped through the folder, my pulse quickening. Overpriced contracts, vague expense reports, and a blurry photo of Karen handing an envelope to a guy in a hard hat. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was close. "Mind if I borrow this?" I asked. "Take copies," she said, pointing to a printer in the corner. "But don't expect the board to listen. They're spineless. You'll need to go bigger." I nodded, already thinking ahead. "Oh, I plan to. She's been sniffing around my cabin, calling 911 like I'm running a crime syndicate. Time to return the favor." Mrs. Delaney's eyes gleamed. Your trouble, Jake. I like it. Just don't let her catch you off guard. She's got a knack for twisting things. I left her house with a stack of copied documents and a new ally. The sun was higher now, baking the asphalt, and I could feel the game shifting. Karen wasn't just a busybody. She was playing dirty with real money. That made her dangerous, but also vulnerable. I drove back to the cabin, the folder on my passenger seat like a ticking bomb. That afternoon, I got to work. I scanned Mrs. Delaney's documents and emailed them to a friend at the county clerk's office, Lisa, who owed me a favor after I landscaped her backyard for free. Can you check if these contracts are legit? I wrote. And see if Pineview's filed anything funky with their permits. Lisa replied within an hour. This looks shady. Give me a couple days. While I waited, Karen upped the ante. I was hauling logs for a new fence when Tom called, sounding like he'd just seen a ghost. Jake, you gotta see this. Karen's got a crew at the edge of your property. They're measuring the road, and she's telling everyone you're planning to block it. I dropped the log, the thud echoing through the trees. She's on my land again? Unbelievable. I grabbed my keys and drove to the dirt road, my truck bouncing over the ruts. Sure enough, there was Karen, clipboard in hand, directing two guys in vests who were poking around with tape measures. Camera guy was there too, filming like he was making a documentary about my road's criminal potential. I parked and strolled over, hands in my pockets, keeping my tone light. Morning, Karen. You know trespassing's a bad look for an HOA president, right? She spun around, her face a mix of fury and fake innocence. This is a public safety issue, Mr. Larson. We're ensuring the road meets county standards. I laughed, loud enough to make one of the vest guys flinch. County standards? You're on my property, measuring my road, without my permission. That's not safety. That's stupidity. I turned to camera guy. Hope you're getting this on tape. Makes great evidence for the sheriff. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she didn't back down. We've consulted our lawyer. This road is critical infrastructure, and we have every right to inspect it. I stepped closer, close enough to smell her perfume, which was probably called essence of entitlement. You consulted Greg, huh? Tell him to read the easement agreement. Or better yet, I'll send it to him myself, right after I call the sheriff about you trespassing. Again, she opened her mouth, then closed it, her lips a tight line. The vest guys exchanged looks, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Camera guy lowered his camera, probably sensing this wasn't his big break. Karen waved them off, and they scrambled back to their van like roaches when the light comes on. This isn't over, she hissed, storming off. I watched her go, the dust from her SUV settling on my boots. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of it. Karen was doubling down, but so was I. Back at the cabin, I checked my email. Lisa had come through. Found something, she wrote. Pineview's last 3 permit renewals for the road are missing your signature. Technically, they're in violation. Want me to flag it? I grinned, typing back. Not yet. Let's see how deep she digs. Karen was building her own trap, and I was happy to hand her the shovel. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking, and sipped my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. Mrs. Delaney's documents were my ace, but the permit issue was my checkmate. Karen thought she was winning, but she was about to crash into a wall she didn't even see coming. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a chainsaw in the distance, probably some Pineview resident trimming a tree to avoid Karen's wrath. The air was thick with the scent of damp pine and coffee brewing on my stove. I was halfway through my first cup when my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Karen's pushing for a vote to sue you. You in? I smirked, typing back. Wouldn't miss it. If Karen wanted to play lawyer, I'd give her an audience and a surprise. I spent the day preparing, digging through Mrs. Delaney's documents and cross-referencing them with Lisa's findings from the county. The HOA's permit renewals for the access road were indeed missing my signature, a sloppy oversight that could land them in hot water. Better yet, Mrs. Delaney's folder had a gold mine. Invoices from Karen's cousin's construction company, padded with charges for consulting fees and emergency repairs that never happened. One receipt even listed $5,000 for fountain maintenance, On a date when the community center's fountain was bone dry for scheduled cleaning. It was the kind of sloppy greed that made my blood sing. Karen wasn't just a control freak. She was a crook. I printed out the juiciest documents, highlighting the discrepancies, and tucked them into a folder. Then I called Mrs. Delaney. "You up for crashing an HOA meeting tonight?" I asked, leaning against my porch railing, the wood cool against my back. Her laugh was sharp, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Oh, honey, I've been banned from those meetings, but for you, I'll make an entrance." "What's the plan?" "Bring your evidence," I said. "We're gonna let Karen talk herself into a corner, then hit her with the truth. Wear that sun hat. It'll drive her nuts." She cackled. "You're evil." "I love it." The Pineview Community Center was lit up like a Christmas tree when I pulled up that evening, my truck's tires crunching on the pristine gravel lot. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and desperation, the kind that hangs around places where people pretend everything's perfect. Inside, the room was packed, about 30 residents, most looking like they'd rather be watching paint dry. Karen stood at a podium, her clipboard replaced by a laptop projecting a slideshow titled, "Preserving Pineview's Future." The first slide was a photo of my cabin, edited to look like it was falling apart, with a caption, "Threat to our community." I had to hand it to her. She was committed to the bit. I slipped into a seat in the back, next to Tom, who was trying not to laugh. Mrs. Delaney was already there, her sun hat like a beacon of defiance, drawing glares from Karen's loyalists. Karen launched into her speech, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This unpermitted structure," she said, pointing at the screen, "is not only an eyesore but a legal liability. We've consulted our attorney, and we're prepared to file a lawsuit to protect our property values." A few residents nodded, but others shifted uncomfortably, glancing at my cabin's photo like it was a personal insult. I waited, letting her build her case. She rambled about community standards and safety concerns, even claiming my cabin was a fire hazard because it was too close to the road. I snorted. My cabin was a quarter-mile from the dirt road, hidden by trees. She was grasping at straws, and the crowd was starting to notice. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood up, holding my folder like a weapon. "Mind if I say something, Karen?" I asked, my tone all sunshine and sarcasm. Her eyes narrowed, but she couldn't say no without looking like a dictator. She nodded, lips tight. I walked to the front, ignoring the whispers. "Folks," I said, addressing the room, "Karen's been telling you my cabin's a problem, but let's talk about the real issue. This road you're all worried about." I held up a copy of the easement agreement. "It's on my land. I own it, and your HOA's been using it without my approval for years." I paused, letting that sink in. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went from red to purple. "That's absurd," she snapped. "The road is public property." "Wrong," I said, sliding the agreement onto the projector. The clause glowed on the screen. "Access subject to landowner approval." I turned to the crowd. "Your permits are invalid." "Want to know why?" "Because Karen never bothered to get my signature. And now she's trying to bully me into tearing down my home. Funny how she's more worried about my cabin than her own shady deals." The room erupted in murmurs. Karen slammed her laptop shut. "This is slander. You have no proof." "Oh, I've got proof," I said, nodding to Mrs. Delaney. She stood, sun hat bobbing, and held up her own folder. "I've got receipts," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Karen's been funneling HOA funds to her cousin's company for years. Overpriced contracts, fake repairs, your dues are paying for her family vacations." The crowd went wild, half shouting questions, half yelling at Karen. She tried to regain control, banging on the podium like a judge with a gavel, but it was too late. I handed out copies of the invoices, letting the numbers speak for themselves. One guy, a retired accountant named Phil, grabbed a sheet and started muttering about tax fraud. Karen looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I leaned against the wall, watching the chaos unfold. "You wanted a lawsuit, Karen," I said, loud enough for her to hear over the din. "Hope you're ready to lose." She stormed out, camera guy trailing her like a kicked puppy. The meeting dissolved into arguments, with Mrs. Delaney holding court like a queen. I slipped out, the cool night air a relief after the stuffy room. Tom caught up with me, grinning. You just started a revolution, man. Not yet, I said, climbing into my truck. But we're getting there. Back at the cabin, I sat on the porch, the stars sharp above the pines. Karen was rattled, but she wasn't done. People like her don't go down without a fight, and I could feel the tension coiling tighter. My next move was already brewing, a way to turn her own game against her. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm in my hands, and smiled. The trap was set, and Karen was walking right into it. The fallout from the HOA meeting was like tossing a match into a pile of dry leaves. By morning, my phone was buzzing with texts from Tom, who'd become my unofficial spy in Pineview. Neighborhood split, he wrote. Half think you're a hero, half think you're Satan. Karen's rallying her loyalists. I grinned, setting my coffee mug on the porch railing, the wood still damp from last night's dew. The air carried the sharp tang of pine and a hint of smoke from a distant bonfire. Karen wasn't just mad. She was cornered, and that made her dangerous. But I was ready for her next move. Or so I thought. I spent the morning at the cabin, reinforcing my new fence with extra posts, the hammer's thud echoing through the trees. It wasn't just for looks. I wanted Karen to know I wasn't budging. Around noon, I got an email from Lisa at the county clerk's office. HOA just filed a formal complaint against you, claiming your cabin violates zoning laws. They're pushing for an inspection. Also, their permit records are a mess, still no valid signature from you. Want me to escalate? I typed back, hold off. Let them think they're winning. Lisa's reply was a Diablo emoji. I liked her style. By afternoon, the other shoe dropped. I was hauling a load of mulch for a client when Tom called, his voice tight. Jake, you gotta get to your place. Karen's got a county inspector out there, and they're poking around your cabin. She's saying you're running an illegal business. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. An inspector? On my property? Without notice? My truck's engine growled as I floored it toward the cabin, the tires kicking up gravel. Karen wasn't just escalating. She was playing dirty, dragging the county into her vendetta. I could picture her smug face, probably waving her clipboard like a victory flag. When I pulled up, there she was, standing on my land like she owned it, next to a guy in a county polo shirt who looked like he'd rather be auditing a landfill. Camera guy was there too, filming my cabin like it was evidence in a murder trial. The inspector was scribbling on a tablet, his face neutral but his shoulders tense. Karen spotted me and plastered on a smile so fake it could have been made in a factory. Mr. Larson, she said, her voice syrupy. This is Mr. Thompson from the county. We're here to ensure your structure complies with regulations. I climbed out of my truck, slamming the door loud enough to make camera guy jump. Funny, I don't recall inviting you. Or getting notice of an inspection. That's a violation of county protocol, isn't it, Mr. Thompson? The inspector glanced up, clearly uncomfortable. Well, Ms. Mitchell said this was an emergency. Alleged unpermitted construction and commercial activity. He looked at Karen, who nodded like she was coaching a kid at a spelling bee. Commercial activity? I laughed, crossing my arms. I run a landscaping business out of my truck, not my cabin. And this place has been here since the 70s, fully permitted. You got a warrant to be on my land. Thompson hesitated, tapping his tablet. No warrant, but Ms. Mitchell provided documentation. Documentation? I cut in, stepping closer. You mean her little petition? Check the county records, pal. My deed's clean, and your boss will have a fit when he hears you're trespassing without cause. I turned to Karen, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Nice try, though. Love the initiative. Maybe next time bring a lawyer who knows what he's doing. Karen's smile faltered, but she doubled down. We have every right to protect our community. Your cabin is a blight, and we'll prove it. She gestured to camera guy, who was still filming, though he looked like he was rethinking his life choices. Thompson cleared his throat. I'll need to verify the permits. Can you provide proof of compliance? I grinned, pulling a folder from my truck, copies of my granddad's deed and the original cabin permits, neatly organized. Right here. Built in 1974, approved by the county. You want the originals? They're in my safe. Or you can check the records yourself. Lot 47, Larson property. He took the folder, skimming it while Karen's face went from smug to sour. This seems in order, he muttered. I'll need to confirm with the office, but… Confirm it, I said, cutting him off. And while you're at it, check Pineview's road permits. You might find something interesting. I shot Karen a look, and her eyes widened just enough to tell me she knew I was onto her. Thompson left, promising to follow up, and Karen stormed off with camera guy in tow, her heels sinking into the dirt. I watched her SUV peel out, leaving a cloud of dust that clung to the pines. Round one of her counterattack was a bust, but I knew she wasn't done. People like Karen don't quit, they pivot. That evening, I met Mrs. Delaney at her place to strategize. Her kitchen smelled of lavender and fresh-baked cookies, a stark contrast to the war we were planning. She slid a plate of snickerdoodles across the table, her sun hat parked on a chair like a silent partner. Karen's rattled, she said, tapping her folder of evidence. But she's got the board eating out of her hand. They're voting tomorrow to fund her lawsuit against you. I bit into a cookie, the cinnamon sharp on my tongue. Let her sue. She'll crash and burn when the county sees her permits are fake. But we need more eyes on her scams. You know anyone who can spread the word? She smirked. My book club. Bunch of nosy retirees with too much time and fast fingers on email. They've been itching to take Karen down. I grinned. Perfect. Get them to share your evidence, quietly. Don't mention me yet. Let's see how many rats jump ship when they smell trouble. By nightfall, Mrs. Delaney's book club had sent a chain email to half of Pineview, with scanned copies of her invoices and a polite but pointed note. Is our HOA president using our dues wisely? I sat on my porch, the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth, reading Tom's updates. Karen's freaking out. Board's getting nervous. Keep it up. I sipped my coffee, the mug's warmth grounding me. Karen's counterattack had backfired, but the tension was thicker than ever. She was cornered, and a cornered Karen was unpredictable. I had my deed, my allies, and a plan, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her next move would be her nastiest yet. The morning after Mrs. Delaney's book club unleashed their email blitz, Pineview was a powder keg. I woke to the sound of birds chirping and my phone buzzing like an angry hornet. Tom had sent a string of texts. Karen's losing it. Board's panicking. She's calling an emergency response meeting tonight. You gotta see this. I grinned, rolling out of bed, the floorboards creaking under my bare feet. The cabin smelled of cedar and the faint bitterness of yesterday's coffee. Outside, the pines swayed in a breeze that carried the sharp scent of sap and the promise of chaos. Karen was scrambling, and I was ready to push her over the edge. I spent the morning at my desk, sifting through emails from Lisa at the county clerk's office. She dug deeper into Pineview's records and found a jackpot. Not only were their road permits invalid without my signature, but Karen had submitted falsified documents claiming I'd approved them. Forgery. That was a felony, and it made my blood hum with anticipation. I printed the evidence, adding it to my growing folder of Karen's misdeeds. It was heavy now, like a brick I couldn't wait to drop on her head. Around noon, I drove to Pineview to gauge the mood. The neighborhood was a pressure cooker. Residents whispered in driveways, casting nervous glances at the community center. I spotted Mrs. Delaney watering her wildflowers, her sun hat practically glowing in the sun. She waved me over, her smirk sharper than a pruning shear. My book club's got the whole place talking, she said, spritzing a daisy. Karen's claiming your flyers and my emails are defamation. She's threatening to sue half the neighborhood now. I laughed, leaning against her fence, the wood warm under my palms. She's got a funny way of uniting people, just not how she planned. You going to her meeting tonight? Wouldn't miss it, she said, her eyes glinting. I've got a few more surprises for her. Brought my old camcorder to record the meltdown. I nodded, impressed. Send me the footage. Might come in handy. We parted ways, and I headed back to the cabin, my mind racing. Karen's desperation was my opening, but I had to play it smart. She was cornered, and cornered animals bite. That afternoon, I got a call from the sheriff's deputy, same guy, sounding like he was one Karen complaint away from quitting. Jake, she's at it again, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Called 911. Says you're threatening the community with your sign and those flyers. I'm supposed to bring you in for questioning. I snorted, splitting firewood behind the cabin, the axe's thud punctuating my words. Threatening? She's the one forging county documents. Tell you what, come by for a coffee, and I'll show you proof she's breaking the law. He sighed. Can't ignore a 911 call, but I'm not hauling you in. I'll swing by later. Try not to start a riot before then. I chuckled, hanging up. Karen's 911 calls were losing their bite. The deputy knew she was crying wolf, but it showed how far she'd go to keep control. The emergency response meeting was at 7 p.m., and I showed up early, parking my truck across from the community center. The lot was packed, cars lined up like soldiers in Karen's army. Inside, the room buzzed with tension, residents packed shoulder to shoulder, some clutching Mrs. Delaney's emails like they were contraband. Karen stood at the podium, her pantsuit pristine but her face flushed, like she'd been yelling before the meeting even started. Camera guy was set up in the corner, filming like his life depended on it, while Greg the lawyer hovered nearby, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I slipped in next to Mrs. Delaney, who was fiddling with her camcorder, her sun hat drawing glares from Karen's loyalists. Karen launched into her speech, her voice a mix of fury and fake tears. We are under attack, she declared, pointing at a new slide showing my sign and a doctored photo of my cabin with graffiti photoshopped on it. This man is not only defying our community standards, but spreading lies to tear us apart. We must stand united and pursue legal action to protect Pineview. The crowd was split. Some clapped, others muttered. Phil, the retired accountant, stood up, holding one of Mrs. Delaney's invoices. What about these? He asked, his voice steady. You've been overcharging us for years, Karen. Care to explain the $5,000 fountain repair that never happened? The room went dead silent. Karen's eyes widened, but she recovered fast. Those are baseless accusations from a disgruntled resident, she snapped, glaring at Mrs. Delaney. We're here to discuss the real threat, Mr. Larson's illegal activities. I couldn't stay quiet. I stood, holding my folder, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her nonsense. Illegal? Let's talk illegal, Karen. You've been forging my signature on county permits for years. I held up Lisa's email, the forgery evidence clear as day. That's a felony. And while we're at it, your cousin's construction company's been fleecing this neighborhood. Want to explain that to the sheriff? The crowd erupted, shouts drowning out Karen's attempt to respond. Greg whispered something in her ear, and she banged on the podium, screaming for order. Mrs. Delaney hit record on her camcorder, capturing every second of Karen's unraveling. I handed out copies of the forgery evidence, letting the residents see the truth. One woman, a young mom with tired eyes, gasped as she read it. This is why my dues went up last year, she demanded, waving the paper at Karen. Karen's face was a mask of rage, but she tried one last play. This is a setup, she shouted. He's manipulating you all to avoid accountability for his shack. But the tide had turned. Even her loyalists were whispering, doubt creeping into their eyes. I leaned back, letting the chaos unfold. You keep talking about accountability, Karen, I said, loud enough for the room to hear. How about you start with your own? Mrs. Delaney snorted, her camcorder whirring. The meeting ended in a shouting match, with Karen storming out, Greg trailing her like a scolded dog. Back at the cabin, I sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and victory. Tom texted, she's done, man. Board's calling for an audit tomorrow. I sipped my coffee, the mug's warmth steadying me. Karen's empire was crumbling, but I knew she had one last card to play. The tension was a tightrope now, and I was ready to cut it. Tomorrow, I'd bring the hammer down, and Karen would wish she'd never set foot on my land. The sun rose over the pines, casting long shadows across my cabin's porch, where I sat with my coffee, the mug's heat seeping into my palms. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and the faint buzz of a distant lawnmower from Pineview. Last night's meeting had left Karen's empire teetering, and today was the day to topple it. My phone pinged with a text from Tom. Board's meeting at 10 a.m. to vote on the audit. Karen's pulling out all the stops. Be ready. I grinned, the thrill of the hunt buzzing in my veins. Karen was about to learn what happens when you poke a bear with a clipboard. I spent the morning finalizing my plan. Lisa from the county had sent me a bombshell. Not only had Karen forged my signature on the road permits, but she'd also misfiled Pineview's HOA financials, claiming inflated maintenance costs to cover her cousin's payouts. It was enough to get the county's attention and maybe the district attorney's. I printed the evidence, adding it to my folder, now so thick it could double as a doorstop. Mrs. Delaney called, her voice crackling with excitement. My book club's got the whole neighborhood riled up. People are showing up to the board meeting with pitchforks, figuratively, for now. You coming? Wouldn't miss it, I said, grabbing my keys. Bring your camcorder. This is going to be a show. The Pineview Community Center was a madhouse when I arrived, the parking lot jammed with cars, some parked crooked like their drivers were too mad to care. Inside, the room was packed, standing room only, with residents clutching copies of Mrs. Delaney's invoices and my forgery evidence. The air smelled of stale coffee and tension, thick enough to choke on. Karen stood at the podium, her pantsuit pristine but her face haggard, like she hadn't slept in days. Greg the lawyer was beside her, sweating through his suit, while camera guy fiddled with his tripod, looking like he was praying for an escape hatch. Mrs. Delaney was in the front row, her son had a beacon of defiance, her camcorder already rolling. Phil the accountant was next to her, holding a spreadsheet he'd made of Karen's shady expenses, his glasses glinting with righteous fury. I slipped in beside Tom, who whispered, "She's got half the board on her side, but the other half's wavering. This could go either way." Karen started the meeting with a speech that was equal parts desperation and delusion. "These accusations are a coordinated attack by troublemakers," she said, her voice shaking as she pointed at me and Mrs. Delaney. "We must protect our community from those who seek to destroy it." She flashed a slide showing my cabin, now edited to look like a haunted house, complete with fake cracks in the walls. The crowd murmured, but the applause was thin. Her loyalists were shrinking. Phil stood up, waving his spreadsheet. "Karen, explain this," he said, his voice cutting through her bluster. "Your cousin's company billed us $20,000 for road repairs last year, but the county says no work was done. Where's the money?" The room exploded in shouts. Karen tried to interrupt, but a woman in the back, a retiree with a perm and a death glare, stood up. "My dues went up 15% last year. Are we paying for your cousin's new boat?" The crowd roared, and Karen's face went from red to ghostly white. I seized the moment, standing with my folder. "While we're asking questions," I said, my voice calm but laced with sarcasm, "let's talk about the road you're all so worried about. Karen's been forging my signature on your permits for years." I held up Lisa's email, projecting it on the screen. "That's a felony, folks. And without my approval, your access to that road? Gone." I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "You might want to ask your president why she thought she could break the law and get away with it." The room went ballistic. Residents were on their feet, yelling at Karen, at the board, at each other. Greg tried to calm things down, stammering about legal reviews, but nobody was listening. Mrs. Delaney's camcorder whirred, capturing every second of Karen's collapse. One board member, a nervous guy named Ted, stood up and shouted, "I move to suspend Karen as president and call for a full audit." The motion passed in a chaotic vote, with even Karen's loyalists abandoning her. Karen grabbed her laptop and bolted for the door, but not before I caught her eye. "Better call your cousin," I said, smirking. "You're gonna need a new hustle." She froze, just for a second, then stormed out, camera guy scrambling after her. The room was a circus, but I felt a strange calm. This was it, the climax of our war. That afternoon, the sheriff's deputy showed up at my cabin, but this time he wasn't alone. A county investigator was with him, a woman named Claire with a no-nonsense vibe. "Mr. Larson," she said, shaking my hand, "we got a tip about forged permits and HOA fraud. Mind sharing what you've got?" I handed over my folder, every damning page. It's all there. Forgery, inflated contracts, the works. Karen Mitchell's been running a scam for years. Claire skimmed the documents, her eyebrows climbing higher with each page. "This is substantial," she said. "We'll be opening an investigation. You willing to testify if it comes to that?" "Try and stop me," I said, grinning. The deputy chuckled, tipping his hat. "Told you she was trouble, Jake." A week later, the fallout hit. The county revoked Pineview's road permits pending a full review, forcing the HOA to negotiate with me directly. I agreed to temporary access, on the condition they elect a new president. Karen was suspended, her cousin's contracts canceled, and the district attorney was sniffing around her finances. Mrs. Delaney's book club threw a party, and I brought a case of beer, toasting to the end of the clipboard tyranny. The air smelled of barbecue and freedom, and Mrs. Delaney's sun hat bobbed as she danced with Phil to some old jazz tune. I sat on my porch that night, the stars bright above the pines, the creek gurgling like it was laughing at Karen's defeat. My cabin was safe, my land untouched, and Pineview was learning to live without their dictator. Tom texted me a photo of Karen's SUV, packed with boxes, leaving Pineview for good. "Heard she's moving to Florida," he wrote. "Good riddance." I sipped my coffee, the mug's warmth a quiet victory. Karen thought she could bully me, but she didn't know I held the keys to her kingdom. The road, the permits, the truth, it was all mine to wield. And in the end, I didn't just win. I made her regret ever stepping foot on my land. Somewhere out there, she was probably clutching her clipboard, cursing my name. And I was just fine with that. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.